Okay, 10 more seconds and then we'll be back on. Thank you, Brother Salahuddin. Sorry for that.
A black and white count. Remember, I was the only black kid in this school from 1 through 8th.
Hey, 1 turn 8130, clear for takeoff, 31 center, southwest 1772.
Tower Jet 651, heading 360, 170, rated to Irving.
That story stays with me many, many years later. But, however, coming from the strong parents that I come from, both mother and father, fortunately, they always taught me several things. One, as a black American in this country, you will have to work very hard, twice as hard to get half as far, and you never let anyone stop you from what you are capable of. Always believe in yourself. Be consistent, be persistent, never give up. You know, when we major, when we work, when we study, we have to always remember our ultimate responsibility. What can we do to help in that way? What you do, where you do it, where you go, who do you hang out with, what do you see, what do you talk about? Be very, very careful, because you won't get this second back. For me, actually, when I became Muslim, because of coming from a background of being black in the United States, and of course coming from a society was very repressive and oppressive in dealing with black Americans. However, that actually equipped me for later on becoming a Muslim, becoming a Shia in this same society. Because they had never faced discrimination. They had never faced hardships. Don't be afraid of challenges. Don't be afraid of hardships. It's through the hardship that we actually make ourselves
Wabarakatuhu. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you so much, everybody, for being patient with us with regards to that. We had a small glitch on YouTube. We had to reset the system and it took longer. Apparently, YouTube doesn't like us. So I apologize to all of the watchers. We were supposed to have Brother Salahuddin Kareem next. Unfortunately, due to some technical difficulties, we have asked to leave Sister Manar Mohawish to come forward, inshallah, and give her discussion points and talk, inshallah. Topic will be what's been happening on the ground and where is our community standing. Sister Manar Mohawish is the founder of Mint Press News. She's the CEO and editor-in-chief of Mint Press News and is also a regular speaker on responsible journalism, sexism, neoconservatism within the media and journalism startups. She started her career as an independent multimedia journalist covering Midwest and national politics while focusing on civil liberties and social justice issues, posting her reporting and exclusive interviews on her blog, Mint Press, which she later turned into Mint Press, into a global news source that it is today. So Sister Manar, we thank you so much. Appreciate your time and your energy, inshallah. Without further ado, I'll pass it on to her. Thank you so much.
All right. Can you guys see me and hear me?
You're good to go.
Okay, thank you. Well, first of all, I just want to say assalamu alaikum and thank you for allowing me to speak and for inviting me here today. I just want to give a huge shout out to the organizers for giving the title for this event, Decolonize Your Minds to Find Your Footing. Because if George Floyd's killing meant anything, it was truly a mirror into the need to decolonize our minds. Because when we think of colonialism, many people first come to mind, they start thinking of like the British Empire or the French Empire, colonizing countries in Africa. But in fact, we have modern day colonialism happening right here in the United States. The United States is the largest empire the world has ever seen, with over 800 bases around the world. And George Floyd's killing and murder by Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin was really just a mirror for the colonization of people here, right here in the United States, especially for the African American community. And as a journalist, when I was covering the George Floyd protests and his murder and the movement that was triggered after him, the first thing that came to mind was the fact that for 3 months, Americans were quarantined under the coronavirus pandemic. And so George Floyd's murder by Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin was really a trigger because of larger frustrations than just the police killing of George Floyd, but frustrations by greater militarization, unemployment, income inequality. And in the 3 months during the pandemic, we saw the largest accumulation of billionaire wealth in this country than in any time in American history. Billionaires in this country like Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, Michael Bloomberg, they accumulated over $282 billion worth of wealth during the pandemic when over 40 million Americans had filed for unemployment. And so when I went on the ground here in Minneapolis, which is my hometown, and I saw the murder, when I watched that video of Derek Chauvin, the Minneapolis police officer, kneeling on George Floyd's neck, kneeling on him for over 8 minutes when George Floyd was yelling, "I can't breathe, struggling and calling for his mama. Those were the words of a people here in the United States. I can't breathe. We are a community of people here that are living under the bootstrap of these billionaires. this group of billionaires that make up less than 1,000 people, like the names that I had mentioned. And so when George Floyd was killed, it triggered a greater movement. And so when we went, both myself and some of our reporters at Mint Press News, down to Minneapolis to cover the protests, we spoke to the people on the ground who are protesting peacefully, who are holding their signs, calling for justice for George Floyd, demanding for defunding of the police, demanding for community control of the police and the end of the militarization. Something was very clear, that this was a frustration that had been simmering for many, many months prior to George Floyd's killing, which was massive unemployment, these communities of color living under oppressive police brutality, racial profiling, and living in what we could call a microcosm of US colonialism right here in our communities. And what I had seen while I was live streaming these protests were these mass movements of people, all peaceful, unarmed civilians demanding very basic things like justice. That the police officer that had killed George Floyd, Derek Chauvin and the 3 other officers that were standing by, that they all be arrested and put to trial. But then we had the Attorney General here in Minnesota, and we had our politicians saying, well, these things take time. We have to be patient, they were telling the protesters. And the longer that people waited for Derek Chauvin to be arrested initially, the more anger had built up with these protesters. And immediately, while the people had been coming together here in Minneapolis, which was an incredibly amazing thing to witness, we saw the media begin to portray the protesters as thugs, as rioters, and only focus on the burning of the buildings. But what I saw in Minneapolis was the mass protests and the mass movement, where the majority were extremely peaceful. And then we saw people on TV, people like Anderson Cooper, Amy Klobuchar, and people on MSNBC and CNN, some of the most prominent voices of US empire, the ones that promote war constantly, who support apartheid in Israel, kind of switch the narrative and pretend that they were now in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. And they were now giving kind of this sugar-coated narrative that they wanted to call for unity on the streets of America, while the president was calling these protesters thugs and calling for the National Guard to mobilize onto the streets of Minneapolis. And so it was a very incredible thing to see how the media was playing the protests and trying to manipulate the narrative and trying to manipulate the emotions, since the emotions were very high during this time, considering that Derek Chauvin had yet to be arrested. And so something that I wanted to bring up was, hold on right here. People like Amy Klobuchar, who had been, when she was the Attorney General here in Minneapolis, some of the things that she had been saying was that, we have to call for unity in the time of George Floyd, because, oops.
Assalamu alaikum, guys. We seem to have had a little bit of a hiccup real quickly. Inshallah, if you guys can just stay on board. Today, our technical difficulties have been too numerous to explain for a multitude of small reasons, that none of which have to do with us, more to do with just the way the network is currently working. So if you guys can just hold on a little bit, and we'll get back to you ASAP, inshallah.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. So, as I was saying before I got cut off here, during the George Floyd protests that saw this mass mobilization of anti-police brutality, peaceful protesters across the country, I was there in Minneapolis at the epicenter of this movement, of this revolution. And it was pretty incredible to see the protesters, who were obviously unarmed, being portrayed by the media as rioters, as looters, as those burning buildings, and even President Trump calling these protesters, tweeting it out, that they were actually thugs. And so at the very beginning of this movement, we saw this media portrayal in a very, very negative light of people protesting for justice for George Floyd. And some things that I wanted to bring up were pretty notable people like Anderson Cooper, Amy Klobuchar, who were calling for unity, in the mainstream press. And the reason I bring these two individuals up is because their statements were very much ironic. Amy Klobuchar, for example, she sat as she's at this time, was being named as the vice president nominee for Joe Biden, and she was initially one of the Democratic presidential nominees. But prior to this, she actually was in the position as Attorney General in Minnesota. And Derek Chauvin, during the time that she was an Attorney General, she actually left him off the hook and released and did not charge him with any murder charges when he had actually killed several people during her time under her watch. And then we have people like Anderson Cooper, who is one of the largest promoters of US empire around the world. He is, regularly, and he's actually known to have previously worked for the CIA before joining CNN, despite him being this darling of CNN. He is regularly seen on TV promoting Cold War propaganda, whether it's Russiagate, an anti-Russian, sentiment, and also promoting, U.S. wars and militarism in the Middle East. And then you have these individuals in these notable TV stations and these networks who are regularly promoting, modern day colonialism and U.S. empire and militarism abroad. And now when it comes to the Black Lives Matter movement, they kind of started to change their tune a little bit, because they saw that the mobilization of people was so massive in the United States that there was nothing to stop them but to actually call for peace and to call for calm, and to try to use these news personalities like Anderson Cooper to kind of pull at the heartstrings of Americans. Like, Anderson Cooper, when I think of him, I think of like him being like this media darling within the liberal establishment media. And so, and it partly worked, because shortly after that, protests started to kind of wind down a little bit, even though, politicians were saying, okay, we're going to work with you and we're going to look at, putting the police in more community control. We're going to get more people involved in the community, involved in justice. None of these things are actually happening on the ground. And so what's really interesting is when I was on the ground in Minneapolis at the epicenter of this movement, I met a lot of Black Lives Matter protesters and organizers on the Minneapolis front, at the local front in Minneapolis. And it was really interesting to see them calling for the end of the two-party system, calling for, getting money out of politics, calling for, defunding the police, and calling for the end of militarism at the very, very top, whether it's, militarism with US bases abroad, or with police, and ending police brutality. And then they were also calling out the Democratic Party, especially like the liberal establishment, from infiltrating their movement. And I think this is really important to recognize, that people on the local front are very aware of attempts and efforts by especially the Democratic Party and their cronies to try to infiltrate the Black Lives Matter movement and try to placate the movement, and placate the people, and co-opt the justice movement. And so people are aware of these things. This was a very, very big message that was being sent on the local front, but it wasn't addressed within mainstream media. And this is why it's really important to follow independent media like Mint Press or other outlets like Unicorn Riot, who are on the ground interviewing these folks and following their live streams. Some of the things that I witnessed on the ground in Minneapolis, which were incredibly traumatizing for me, coming from a Palestinian background, being a Palestinian American who lived under Israeli apartheid, is I saw such a parallel between the way American police brutalized protesters here in Minneapolis in comparison to the way Israeli soldiers brutalized Palestinians. First, we have the image of Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin kneeling on the neck of George Floyd, and while he was struggling to breathe and calling for his mama and just really struggling to say, "I can't breathe." How many images have we seen, viral images of Israeli soldiers kneeling on the necks of Palestinian adolescents, children, kneeling on them when they try to grab them and to put them into custody? These are tactics that have been taught by the Israeli military to Minneapolis police officers and officers in America in general. We know for a fact that the apartheid regime of Israel is bringing in American police forces to conferences in Israel to learn these policing tactics, also to receive technological advancement training to broaden US policing and surveillance of citizens. And then also for racial profiling, the same way that Israel does towards Palestinians, and to also expand the brutality and the way that police are brutalizing people here in America. And so if you tune into corporate media, corporate mainstream media, who again, all they are is really just entities that work for the same billionaire class that these police forces work for, they're not going to be sharing the story, making those comparisons of Minneapolis police officers or American police forces being trained by an apartheid regime. Maybe they'll say that they're being trained in these conferences by Israel, but they would never make the comparison of how these are apartheid practices. Something that I saw when I was live streaming the protest as well was just, living in the suburbs of Minnesota is one thing, seeing the police, but seeing how the Minneapolis, specifically the Minneapolis police departments, are policing communities of color in North Minneapolis, where the murder of George Floyd took place, was extremely incredible to watch, because I saw firsthand how these police officers use brute force. Even before Trump, mobilized the National Guard and said, go ahead and just shoot these protesters, the Minneapolis police departments were already shooting protesters. They were firing tear gas, rubber bullets. In fact, and they were actually targeting a lot of live streamers like myself and other journalists. There was, I think it was like day 3 of the protest, where I was standing there live streaming. I witnessed a group of about 3 men coming together, and they burnt down a Wells Fargo building versus the, I would say over 1,000 other unarmed, peaceful protesters that were there demanding justice for George Floyd at the 3rd precinct. Literally just a couple of minutes after I had moved from this position, I would say about 5 minutes after I had moved from that position, another journalist who was live streaming had been standing in that same spot that I was, and she was actually blinded by police. They shot her with a rubber bullet in her eye. And there's no question in my mind that they targeted her because she was a journalist and she was a live streamer. And now she's been blinded in her left eye. She can no longer see, this is how she's going to have to live forever. Another instance that I witnessed was when late at night, we had been following the protesters through Minneapolis, and police were rounding up protesters. They had encircled them. And so I was kind of getting close with my camera, live streaming what I was seeing. And next thing I know, I look to my left and I see police just shooting rubber bullets, shattering the windshields of cars that were passing by. And it was 11 o'clock at night, pitch black. There was no indication that the road was closed. All you could see, like from a distance, were, just, the reflections of like the street lights on the helmets of these police officers. And police now were shooting live ammunition and rubber bullets. I saw them with my own eyes on camera, and I live streamed this on Mint Press News, and they were shooting at people just driving by without any indication that the road was closed. And so it was very scary and very traumatic to see. One family that was driving by, it was a family, it was a mother and a father, and it was a group of children sitting in the back, and their windshield was completely shattered. And they had no idea what was going on. They just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And then another time, a journalist was driving by with his, in his car, and he was also targeted, and he was hit in the chest with a rubber bullet, and he was bleeding. And if you think about it, the media likes to show that the police are acting in a way that's, they're just defending, they're just doing their job, and they're just, they're only using rubber bullets, when in fact these rubber bullets are blinding people and they can actually kill people. That's what they're doing. And so the brutality that we saw was pretty incredible. It was pretty intense. And it's really important during this time for people who are following the coverage of George Floyd's justice movement to tune into independent media to see the alternative coverage in comparison to what the mainstream media was providing. We have organizations like the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, MSNBC, promoting militarism at the same time while denouncing militarism. And so we have to ask ourselves if this media truly does work in our interest. And of course, the answer is no. And just to go back to my point about the billionaire class, people on the street were protesting, were very frustrated, not just by racial, injustice. Again, the whole movement that followed George Floyd's death was, about a broader movement of militarism at a bigger and larger scale from the very top to the bottom. I was extremely impressed to see the protesters not only talking about and demanding for defunding the police and community control over the police and, ending the police state and ending militarization, but they were also talking about income inequality. They were also bringing attention to the billionaire class, who we know that these police officers, these police forces are there to ensure that these unjust laws are put into place. This racial profiling is put into place so that we can, control these communities of color. But they were also talking about demanding an end to the two-party system. And the reason I bring this up again is because the Democratic Party, especially, we know that the Republican Party is racist. They're like outwardly racist, right? But the Democratic Party is more manipulative because on the outside, they come to portray themselves as this, political party that is there, that is liberal, that is progressive, supporting communities of color, when in fact, the entire premise of the Democratic Party was founded on white supremacism. And the Democratic Party is, maybe on the outside may appear to be this way, but on the inside, their true face is white supremacism. It is militarism. It is being controlled by the lobbyists and the 1% and the billionaire class. And so a good example of this is when we had Obama in office. When Obama was in office, sure, he was our first Black president, but he was basically the Uncle Tom. He was there to push things forward, like expanding militarism across the globe, expanding US bases, expanding the war on whistleblowers, expanding the racial profiling on communities of color, increase of stop and frisk. Obama imprisoned or incarcerated more people under his administration than any administration previous to him. And so we have to look at the Democratic Party and not fall for their propaganda of being a liberal force or a progressive force. And what does that even mean? And so as Muslims, and I'll end it here because I know that we're running out of time, as Muslims, especially like I can share a little bit about my story. I was born and raised here, but I lived under Israeli apartheid and the Israeli police state system. And it was there that ignited a fire within myself to stand up to police states and apartheid states and racism and colonialism and racial injustice and income inequality. It was there that ignited that. And so I hope that as Muslims, we understand and realize that this whole movement for Black Lives Matter is not just about Black lives. This is a movement about decolonizing all of us, all of humanity from the chains of modern day colonialism. And what that means is that we live in a system led by the United States, which is the largest empire history has ever seen, with over 800 military bases around the world, that is not just expanding its warfare around the world to overthrow governments, to occupy, to exploit, and to enforce a neoliberal economic system. But that is just a mirror of what's happening here. And, Muslims in general, we are demonized right now in the media. And we've been demonized in the media since 9/11 for a purpose. And that purpose was to expand US empire overseas as a cover, by the way, in its war, in its Cold War with Russia, and its economic war with China. Muslims just happen to be a good boogeyman. And through that, Islamophobia found its footing within the mainstream media. But then today, we are being taught how to be moderate. We are being taught that to be accepted, a Muslim woman, hijabi, for example, has to wear a lot of makeup. She has to wear her hijab in a certain way to be recognized as very beautiful and stylish. And, whether it's the Muslim man, if he's, super, super dark or looking a certain way or talking a certain way, we don't want that. Or if you're Muslim, you're not allowed to speak against war and all of these issues of Islam, or not Islamophobia, but war and justice for Palestine or ending US, militarism abroad. You have to fit in. If you want to fit in, you have to be a certain way. And that's why we see this rise of Muslims who are now becoming within the media, but they don't truly represent our values as Muslims because they're not going far enough. And the ones who have spoken out against injustice in Palestine have been demonized, have been deplatformed, and have been removed from their contracts with these, with these corporations. And so something that we have to do as Muslims is recognize what is our true cause in this dunya, in this world. And that is to fight injustice in every aspect in our society. And we are living in the belly of the beast, which is the United States, where our government and our administration and our military and our 1% and our economic system that enslaves us is a system that we have to break free of. And what we need to do is recognize that these issues are not just issues that affect African Americans or even Latinos or just Muslims. It affects all of us. And so we have to stand together and unite together across all of these causes and come together and become the media. Something that I did for myself is I became the media. I started my own independent media organization, Mint Press, and I wasn't just preaching to the choir. It wasn't just to other Muslims. It wasn't just to other people who, cared about these issues, but we present our media and our narrative and our investigations and our news in a way that attracts a broader audience. It attracts people to understand that, hey, if we're going to talk about, this certain issue, let's say, Israel and Palestine or US war in Iraq, I'm just, throwing some ideas out there. We're not just talking about it in a way that's just in terms of US empire and colonialism, but we kind of break it down in a narrative format that makes it understandable to the regular person that this is about profits for a 1% establishment. And they are destroying the tenets of our democracy here. And now they've turned this country into an oligarchy. And so we have to do these little things to be able to attract a mass people to stand with us in this movement. And so when I think of standing up for injustice, I think of, every day when I go to sleep, this is just me. I don't know if this happens to other people, but every single day I think about, what am I doing on a daily basis that is helping my neighbor, helping the people right here in my community in Minneapolis become stronger and become better and stand up. And the best that I can do with the platform that I have is to obviously provide, to amplify their voices and show, what's happening in our own neighborhoods. And so that's what I suggest for more Muslims to do, is to be more involved within the media and to try not to preach to the choir, to your own people, but find a way to talk about these issues that will attract a broader audience, to invite them more to join the movement. And I just want to give one final story of something that I did when I first became a journalist. I started to wear the hijab when I was about 19 years old. And I started my career in a white supremacist city called St. Cloud. There is a lot of white supremacy in St. Cloud, Minnesota. And when I was a journalist there, I was a brand new hijabi, and I was going around the city interviewing people, and a lot of people told me that they were scared of me. A lot of people told me that they had never met a Muslim and they didn't know if I had bombs or knives or weapons under my hijab. These are real, like this really, really actually happened to me. I heard this with my own ears. A woman told me, I don't know if you have weapons under your hijab. Why should I trust you? Why should I talk to you right now? Blatantly afraid. And that's what we have to remember, is that the media works so hard to make people afraid of the other. And so if we can work together to invite people to learn and to connect with people on a deeper level, I connected with white supremacists in St. Cloud, Minnesota, and I changed them. And I helped them see the other side. I showed them that, hey, I'm a Muslim and this is who I am and this is what my faith teaches and this is what I'm doing here to interview about this story. And it changed those people forever. I'm in contact with a lot of those people who said, Manar, because I met you, I'm a different person now. I wasn't angry when they said those things to me. I didn't close them off and say, oh, they're just a white supremacist. Yes, there's a lot of angry people out there, but I had to be patient and I had to smile and I had to bite my tongue at times and allow them to speak their mind and to listen to them. But then I also allowed my love and my positive energy to also invite them and embrace them. And once we talked, it was very clear that these people were living in fear. And not only that, they were concerned and worried about the same things that I was concerned and worried about for my family, for my children, for the economy, for access to resources and jobs and all of those things. And in the end, they didn't trust the government either. But once we figured out that it was the media that was dividing us and driving this fear, we were able to make that connection. And I brought more people into the movement for peace and justice. And I know that that's something that we should be open to. And the reason I bring that up is because sometimes within our movements, we tend to talk to each other too much and we don't kind of step outside to see who can we bring into our movement. And I think that's really, really important to do that. And if we look at, the prophets, whether if it's Islam, Christianity, or Judaism, they didn't just talk to each other, but they always opened the doors up for people of other faiths and other political backgrounds to come in. And it was always through brotherhood and peace and ideals of unity. And so that's what I want to leave our listeners with today.
Sister Manar, thank you so much for your time, for your energy, for your words of wisdom. It truly is remarkable to get such a eye-opening and well thought out point of view that is as true as it comes. It's extraordinarily frustrating for us living in America today to see such blatant lies, the corporatocracy, the military-industrial complex, consistently trying to spread its agenda. As I'm sure you're fully familiar with the annexation of the West Bank that the UN has condemned for the third time without having any effect towards Israel or its occupation tendencies. So, and then of course-
It's theatrics, yes. We have entities that are put in place to, again, just placate the public. Just like the Democratic Party that I mentioned, they placate the public for us to think that change is coming when in fact they're just enabling the system, the entire system, and they will continue to do that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much for your time, Sister Manar. We truly appreciate it. We're going to have to move on to Brother Salahuddin. Once again, to the people, I apologize for having had to switch the speakers. It was our fault. We had a bit of a glitch technically. Sister Menor, if you don't mind, with apologies, if you don't mind turning off your mic and turning off your video so we can shift over to the next speaker. Thank you once again. Brother Salahuddin has been kind enough to wait for us. Just as a quick point of view, brothers and sisters and the general public, we are an independent organization of volunteers. So everything we do it out of love, out of certainty, out of our love for freedom and true democracy in the world around us. So Brother Salahuddin Abdul Karim is a teacher and an activist based in Maryland. He is the founder of Kindness and Care Beyond Borders, an international nonprofit organization. He has taught in Muslim schools across the nation for decades. He has also been an active member in the community, organizing marches and protests and writing on serious issues facing the world. He has also been witnessing the discrimination and oppression towards the Black community for many years. And so without further ado, I'm going to bring him on. Brother Salahuddin, if you don't mind turning on your video and unmuting yourself, we greatly appreciate it. Without further ado.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. You're good to go.
Okay. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. رب السماوات والأرض وما بينهما. والصلاة والسلام على خاتم الأنبياء والمرسلين. النبي الأعظم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين. Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. And to the organizers of this program today, may Allah bless you for bringing us together. And I should say from the beginning, the eloquence of Professor Ramon and the eloquence of our sister Manar exceeds anything that I could say or present this afternoon, late evening. So I apologize for not being of their caliber. I should say to you that my body is shaking and my nerves are running. And it's like, as an African American, the weight of 401 years, counting from 1619, it feels like it's on my back. And I don't think that's a unique feeling for African Americans. I believe every African American is carrying that weight, whether they know it or not. The trauma, the genetic fiber, what is at the core of our being has been transferred to African Americans as a result of nearly 300 to 400 years of enslavement in this country and continuing. So I want to apologize from the beginning if I say something that is incorrect or bothersome. I'm known to do that, but I apologize. I was asked to speak to this topic, this question: where does the Muslim community stand on the issue of the racial justice movement in this country? And that question, I've been trying to dissect it and sort through it in my mind and my feelings from the time I was asked to speak about it. And my thoughts are as follows. First of all, to the question, where does the Muslim community stand on the issue of the racial justice movement in this country? I would answer that by posing a question, which is what? Where is and what is the Muslim community in this country? Where is it? By raising this question, it's not intended to take away from anyone's good intention and hard work. There are, according to reports by some agencies, probably not worthy of our trust, like the Pew Research Center and others, they tried to say our number and they play with us. The number of Muslims in this country, 3.5 million, 4.4, 5 million, depends upon who you're reading. So they tend to play with our number. But whatever that number is, and calling ourselves a Muslim community in this country, we have to be honest and ask ourselves, are we really a Muslim community in this country? And by that, I mean, if we take a look at ourselves throughout this country, and mind you, I don't speak for anyone except for myself. So I'm not an expert on what's going on in Texas or New York. I'm just speaking about what I've seen, what I've experienced, and what I understand from our own limited lens. The Muslim community, if we define it today, what is it in this country? It's a group of people who have come together based on race, based on ethnicity, based on madhahib, based on social status, based on many things that detract from the meaning of what a Muslim community should look like and function like. We are a disconnected, disjointed group of people. We are not sharing an ideological and theological responsibility in a coordinated, cooperative manner. We are here and we are there. And because of that, our plight just lingers and lingers, and we never seem to maximize the barakah and the potential that we have, the endless resources that we have, spiritual resources, intellectual resources, academic resources, monetary resources. We have everything that we need. But in my humble opinion, it's being squandered. We are not maximizing what we have and what we should be doing. That's one problem. Another point I'd make is, in this country, the movement and the call for racial justice should be something every Muslim, whether our number is 4 million, 5 million, more or less, should be attached to that movement. The racial movement in this country, to undo it, systemic racism, 400 years or more, is a responsibility of every Muslim to embrace it and to step out of his or her elitist circle. Many of us, by and large, are more associated with the elite class in this country, upper middle class, the wealthy class. We are not, as a Muslim community in this country, associated with mustadafin in a real way. We talk about them, we lecture about them, we read about them in our literature, but we are not really with them. We're not close to them. We're not extending them a hand to bring them up from the plight that they're in, the miserable plight that has been caused by the injustices in this country. Professor Ramon was absolutely honest and accurate when he talked about structural injustice in this country, institutionalized injustice. It's at the core of this country. This country is toxic at the core. And every Muslim in this country should know that and educate him or herself about this country in a contextualized manner to be current and to know what's necessary to be done to improve things in this country. The idea of racism, which they say is the original sin in this country, and I beg to differ if they're talking about African people's racism. The original sin in this country is what Europeans did to indigenous people in this country and what they are still doing. That's the original sin, if you ask me. And then my people, African people, come along and are exploited and abused and oppressed in that process. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not to be theological, because I'll leave the theological studies to those who are experts, our ulama, our shuyukh, our scholars. They know these subjects far better than I do. But we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in fighting against the notion of racism and elitism and superiority complex, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, he says, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Ya ayyuhan nas, inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha, waj'alnakum shu'uban wa qaba'ila lita'arafu, inna akramakum 'inda Allahi atqakum, inna Allaha alimun khabir. And I think we all know the meaning of that ayat. So for the sake of time, I won't translate it. The racism in this country and the discrimination and what has happened to African people in this country and other marginalized people begs the Muslim community and calls on the Muslim community to work hand in hand with anyone who's oppressed and calling for social justice in this country. The Black Lives Matter movement that has been referenced today and since the killing of George Floyd and even before is a movement that every Muslim should feel responsible to support, because its aim is to undo the chronic injustice in this country, to get rid of it. And Professor Ramon gave us some suggestions about what needs to be done to end it, to bring to an end. When there was a technical glitch with Sister Manar, I tried to find in my archives a small letter that my mother gave to me maybe 20, 25 years ago. I asked her, and my mother is deceased, marhuma. I said, Ma, tell me something that I can tell my students about growing up in Washington, D.C. as a Black person, a Black female. What should I tell them? And she wrote me a note. I wish I could find it, but I couldn't. But I remember its contents. She said, when I was growing up in Washington, D.C., my mother was born June 18th, 1928. She said, when I was growing up in Washington, D.C., we had Black theaters on U Street. People who go to 14th and U, between 15th and 14th and U, there was a movie called A Booker T. Between 14th and 13th, there was a movie called The Republic. And then there was another movie called The Lincoln. Black people had specific movies they could go to, theaters. My mother talked about when she wanted to eat out, she had to eat in the Black restaurant, the Black cafe. They couldn't go downtown and eat. My mother transferred to me the ugly face of racism and abuse that has no border. It's evil. It's destructive. It's life destroying. And we as a Muslim community are supposed to be the ones who give life to everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed with life. We are supposed to preserve it indiscriminately, not play the race game. The Muslim, I'm on my feet because I worked hard and I graduated from one of these universities and I went to law school and medical school and now I'm doing good. Get out of that mentality. Everything that you and I have is a gift from Allah. It has very little to do with your effort. It has all to do with His barakah to you and to me, to be used on behalf of the marginalized, the voices that are crying in the dark and who are calling for us to respond collectively with all of our power and our energy. Back to the question that I was asked to respond to. We are suffering from a leadership deficit. Yes, indeed, we do have many leaders in this country, isolated, with all due respect, working in their masajid, in their centers, working for and with board of directors. Many of these people who may be generous enough to share their money to build an institution, to finance a mosque, we need to send them a message, because right now we need answers. We've done enough dissecting. We know what racism looks like. We know what pain looks like. We saw what happened to George Floyd. We don't need to dissect it anymore. We're wasting time. We need to be people who can resolve problems. For example, for the past 10 years, I've had the humble honor, pleasure of carrying 10 students, 15 students, 20, I believe higher than that, to a Model United Nations conference after they prepare for it, weeks of preparation. When they go to these venues in Model United Nations, what do? They debate, and at the end of the day, they have to resolve a problem. They don't spend all of their time dissecting, debating, critiquing, analyzing. They have to apply themselves to solve a problem. And that should be where we are today, looking at the problems and trying to resolve them. Coming back to masajid and institutions, what's one thing we can do? Since there's been a hue and a cry about racism in the masjid, I have probably 8 of my former students, wonderful people who are now in college, universities, respond to a survey that I put out. And I'm hoping to convene them very soon where they can discuss their findings. And I'll be just an observer, listening and trying to learn what they're feeling and thinking. One thing to get the racism out of the masjid, out of the minds of the people in the masjid, the ones who run it, the ones who attend there, whoever, this discriminating superior attitude, to get it out, we need to let the people know who want to finance the building of a masjid that they don't own it. We might need to put up signs inside our centers and masjid, just like we put up signs that say the bathroom is over here, and the wudu area is over here, and the musalla is over here. Put up a sign and say, no racism in this masjid. If you have a racist behavior, because racism and discrimination are 2 distinct things. A racist who's carrying that in his polluted soul or heart and mind, that's their problem, so long as they keep it in that mind and that sick soul. When it comes out, it's called discrimination, because it's a behavior now. So in our masajid, We need to put up signs. No discrimination in this place. If you have any inkling of wanting to practice it, please leave. We can see you later with an educational therapeutic session that will seek to excavate you in the politest manner possible out of your racist mind and sick behavior. For this to be done, you need visionary, responsible leadership that sees the big picture. Seeing only Germantown as an imam, or Washington, D.C., or Manhattan, or Houston, it's not enough. We work in these places, in communities. We have to. We work where we are. But our vision has to be bigger, and we have to look for opportunities when working together calls upon us to do so. When my wife and I went downtown a few times for the protests, I was asking myself, where are the Muslims? Where are they? The people shouting, Black Lives Matter, no justice, no peace. You have white people, Latinos, or everyone is there. Who's not there? According to what I could see, a handful of Muslims were there for sure. I didn't do a head count, so please accept my generalization. But from what I saw, and most times you can't tell us males by a physical feature, but you can tell by muhajjabat, our sisters, we saw a few. And I was saying, where are the Muslims? George Floyd has been murdered. Breonna Taylor murdered. Tamir Rice murdered. All of these people murdered. Where are the Muslims? What happened? And look at this. I'm going to share this with you, and I'm sorry, I won't talk very long. But I recall going back, I made a little note for myself called anecdotal references, hoping that it would help us see how we have to step out of our little racism, our little ethnicity, these little small circles, madhab circles, Shia conferences with no Sunni scholars on the dais, Sunni conferences where Shias are discriminated against, immaturity at its best, silliness. We're dying, and we don't even have enough decency to invite each other to each other's sessions. And I remember, I share this with you. I have many of these things I quoted. For example, leading up to the revolution in Iran and after that, when America decided to sick its slaves, Saddam and its other lackeys on the Islamic Republic, some of the people maybe listening right now remember we used to walk the streets protesting up and down Mass Avenue, all around the State Department, up and down K Street, Connecticut Avenue, DuPont Circle. Who was there? African Americans were there. Iranian brothers, maybe a few Arab brothers were there. We weren't playing the race game. We weren't playing the nationalism game. We were playing the reality that Islamic Republic, in an embryonic situation, a new birth, was under attack. And it was our duty to respond as a Muslim, caring about social justice. We responded. And I remember one time, Brother Nahidian, if he's with us, he may recall, we were protesting in front of the White House during that early Islamic Republic period. My time may be off. I don't know if it was before the victory in '79 or shortly thereafter. But there were some brothers and sisters in front of the White House, and they were fasting. They were consuming a little salt to stay alive. And I remember this white racist thug from some government agency. He came and he saw me. And we were kind of in a semicircle. And he looked over at me and he said, "What are you doing here, black guy? You have nothing to do with these Iranians. And we're going to get you." Well, I'm still here. That's my message to him. That moment where we were together, standing for justice, honoring the shuhada who had given their lives, those Basijis, those poor people who I had the honor of meeting, some of them in their homes. We were standing together, colorblind, gender blind, status blind, job title blind, no PhD, no MA, no MS, no BA. That was not what brought us together. And it's not what should bring us together. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala orders, "I'dilu wa huwa aqrabu lit-taqwa." You have to stand for justice. You practice it yourself and you support it wherever it is. And finally, to my brothers and sisters, irrespective, I'm not going to use term immigrant, sub-immigrant, minor immigrant, Afro-American, Euro-American, whatever we are. Stop exploiting for your own benefit the painful legacy and reality of this country. You and I should not be here as pimps, pimping America with a job, with an opportunity to go to college, get a degree, get a BMW, get a fancy home, and leave behind those who are in the trenches of life. It does not mean we cannot have material blessings that Allah gives to us. It's a barakah, what He gives. The question is, how do we use it and use us? And for who? Are we being exploited by the status quo, by being silent, being numb, being uncaring, hiding in religious rituals, hoping that will create an identity that will give us a passport on Yawm al-Qiyamah? It will not. It will not. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Ma'un sets the standard when He talks about yatama and poor people and needy, and juxtaposes that with rituals. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't need our wajib salah, our nawafil. He doesn't need it. But He wants us to help those who are crying out. George Floyd called for his mama, and others are still calling because the knee is on their neck. And the knee is on the neck of everyone in this United States. And let us not play into elitism and status quo. Don't play the Potomac game. I live in Potomac or Fairfax or Germantown. We're supposed to live with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Live in His Islam. Live for His cause. Be with those whose voices are silenced. And it starts with training and education and feeling and caring about others. I'm so sorry if I said anything to harm anyone. I apologize. And thank you very much. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Brother Salahuddin, that was truly remarkable. SubhanAllah, you brought tears to my eyes on numerous occasions. If I had 1/5 of your certainty, your strength, I would be a successful man in this world, in the dunya, and inshallah in the akhirah. Thank you so much once again. I truly, truly appreciate it. On behalf of MSA-PSG and Mateen Talks, we are honored to have you. We are so honored to have you. Thank you so much. Subhanallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the reason why you finished last, because mashallah, brother, we have to decolonize our minds in the Western society. We, as Muslims living in the West, are still, to some extent, under the umbrella. We are blind. Our brothers and sisters that go to the mosque and pray together, but when it comes time to marriage, when it comes time to business, we are not aware that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made all of us equal. All of us equal. Inshallah, we can, our generation, the future, can understand this. We can also realize that this is the beginning. Inshallah, we can be more constructive, have a better understanding, and be more informed about what's really going on in this country and outside of this country. Inshallah, we can be more active from a social standpoint with regards to the African American population, the racial injustices that are occurring in this country, that have been occurring for 400 years since the enslavement of the indigenous population. I'm speechless. Once again, Brother Salahuddin, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm going to respectfully ask all of our speakers to please take our appreciation, take our thanks from the bottom of our hearts for all that you've done for us for today. We look forward to having you guys come forward in the future, inshallah, if possible, if you would be so kind. Please forgive us for any technical difficulties that occurred during this program. You know, once again, we are an independent organization. We are volunteers and we're doing our very best. And so, once again, thank you, everybody. Inshallah, I hope to see all of you very soon. We have up and coming programs that we're going to be inviting through Mateen Talks to MSA-PSG. And thank you, Sister Manar. Thank you, Dr. Grossfogel. And of course, Brother Salahuddin, thank you truly. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Thank you. Thank you. All done.